What I want to speak about is in many ways a very important topic. It's clearly been on the mind of everybody. Closer. It's clearly been on the mind of everybody. How do we understand the events of September 11th, the World Trade disaster, and not only that, but the aftermath, the anthrax. And it's not only that, it's also the events happening in Israel. There's something going on here. We all feel it, but we don't know what it is. Yet we all somehow are consciously aware that there's something going on. What I'd like to do tonight is to try to offer a possible explanation. Now, you don't have to agree with me. That's not the intent of the lecture. But what I do want to show you is that it is possible to understand what is going on from a deeper perspective. We are Jews. We don't look at events from the New York Times perspective. We know that if we want to understand what's going on, we look at the Torah. We look at what our sages, the Chazal, have to say. As such, I would like to offer that type of perspective. What exactly do the Chazal, what do they exactly seem to be telling us? This year, in many ways, hopefully, will lend some clarity, and the purpose of the shir really is to mechazek emunah, to strengthen the faith. Thank you. As such, I'm going to try to present a perspective from a Torah perspective, and therefore, let me state at the outset that the ideas or the event has 4 dimensions. Not 1 or 2, but 4. I would like to cover all 4 tonight. It is worthwhile to listen to all 4. That was for emphasis. It is worthwhile to listen to all 4. Because not only will it give you a perspective on what is happening, but it will also give you a perspective on what seems to be coming up ahead. Because in order to know that, you have to understand the framework. What seems to be the divine plan? Then it's possible within that context to understand what's happening and why. First dimension. We are Jews. We have been in exile for 2,000 years. We have a problem. Our problem is that we keep going from country to country. And we forget that we are Jews. We forget that we are the people of God. And we are not really Americans. We are God's people. It happens to be that the host now is America. That's true. But we are not, in essence, Americans or American people. It is true we are American citizens. But our essence isn't America or its values. Our essence is Torah values. Very important idea. Unfortunately, we forget this. We become comfortable in America or in any other country that we reside in. And what we do is we forget who we are and we forget our mission. And that is to bring the belief of God, to do the commandments, the mitzvahs, to do all kinds of chesed and so on. This is our mission. It is our mission to do this within the context of American soil. But we forget about it. Therefore, this necessitates a specific divine response. Usually, it's of a negative nature. God reminds us, He wakes us up. If we take a look at the World Trade Center, we realize one thing. This is a wake-up call to the Jewish people and also America, which we will see. But it's clearly a wake-up call to Jews. Why? We have become used to the fact that America is a safe and secure country. And it's a place where everything is predictable. You go, you make money, you come home, you enjoy whatever the money has created, the family and so on. But all of a sudden we realize this is not true. We realize that we are subject to terrorism just like everywhere in the world. America is no longer a safe country. When you have people putting on gloves to open their mail, this is no longer a safe country. Not only that, there are many people that have lost jobs. This tragedy has affected Americans severely. Listen, I came last Wednesday and I landed in LAX. The place was empty. And I was surprised. I couldn't believe it. LAX is empty? Then I get on an Alamo bus to rent a car. And I'm the only guy in the Alamo bus. So I went into the Alamo place, and I'm the only guy in the place. Now, being careful never to miss an opportunity, I said to the guy, I said, listen, I rented a full-size car, but since I'm so loyal, give me an upgrade. And he gave me an upgrade. You see, you always have to know how to read and take advantage of situations. But the interesting thing about it is that what is going on here? Clearly the devastation that has been created clearly has affected everybody. What God is trying to do, what the Ribono Shel Olam is trying to do is very interesting. He is trying to sever the psychological bond that Jews have with their country. Don't think that this is what you think it is. A safe, secure, predictable, the mother that nurtures us and so on. It is not true. So therefore, our first dimension is that we can look at America, we can look at the events as a wake-up call to the Jewish people. Not only that, it's also a wake-up call to America, which we will see. Now, before I go on, it is very important for us to know that America is a great country. It really is. It's an shel chesed. America has an incredible, generous heart. There's no question about that. The amount of money that America spends on foreign aid is staggering. No country in the world does this. Not only that, other countries in the world feel guilty, so they try to emulate America. But America does it because it believes that the wealthy should help the poor. If God blesses America, as the song goes, then America has to share that blessing with others. And they really believe that. In that sense, America is an shel chesed, a generous country. As such, we are Americans, we are Jews in America, we have to be grateful to America. We have to be makeh toiv to what America does for Jews. When was the last time we were in a country that we could pursue religion, pursue our goals, whatever they are, and nobody started a pogrom? Long time ago. Therefore, we have to be makeh toiv to America. After having said all that, we have to be honest. There is something wrong that is happening. And this begins the understanding of the second dimension. I'm going to tell you something which everybody knows, but people forget. God controls everything. Absolutely. There is no such thing as an event that happens by chance. He controls everything. Everything that happens by a divine decree. In fact, the Talmud says, how far does the hashgacha, the divine assistance, occur? How far? If you take your hand and you put it in your pocket and you want to put a quarter in the meter, and you come out with a dime, that's divine providence. That small amount of pain, that small amount of irritation is decreed that you should have as part of the overall atonement process. Very important. If that's the case, if God is involved in our life, even to the extent of how much we take money out of our pocket to put into a meter, how much more so is He involved in an event that has killed thousands and thousands of people, that have left so many orphans and widows, that has caused unbelievable amount of human misery, besides the price tag of $105 billion, which is what's going to cost to fix that problem. Staggering. And I'm not even talking about the entire America and so on, the terror, the insecurity. How much more so do we understand that God, the Ribono Shel Olam, is responsible, or it is a divine decree. But what does that mean, a divine decree? What are we going to say? That God put in the mind of these 19 guys to destroy the World Trade Center? The truth is that we all have free will, but we don't have complete free will. We have what's called a range of free will. When God wants, He takes over our free will and He uses it for His own agenda. What does that mean? For instance, if somebody is destined to be punished for whatever sin or misdeed they did, so what the Ribono Shel Olam does is He suspends his free will, and He puts in his thought in his mind that you should go that way. The guy goes that way, and he falls over something, some construction site. Therefore, God intervened in his free will in order to bring punishment to this person for whatever deed that God deems must be punished. But most of the time, it's interesting, the Ribono Shel Olam doesn't do that. He doesn't intervene in the free will. But what He does do is this. The Ribono Shel Olam has an agenda, a divine plan. What He will do, you see, even this was divinely ordained. In any case, what the Ribono Shel Olam does is very interesting. He sees that person wants to do evil, and He knows that person has to receive punishment. So He does a shidduch. He makes sure that this person, since he wants to do evil, he's going to do it to that guy. Now, the Ribono Shel Olam doesn't put into his mind to do the evil, but the Ribono Shel Olam has the advantage of knowing who wants to do it. So what God does is He gives the person success. That's what He does. He steps back and He allows the person to go through with his evil intent. This is clearly illustrated many times. The Holocaust is a classic example. We don't know why the Ribono Shel Olam decided to bring death to so many Jews. Not only 6 million Jews died, but 56 million people died. We don't know. We cannot fathom the mind of God at all. But we do know that's what He wanted. Now, the Ribono Shel Olam had to look around for somebody that wanted to do evil of an incredible magnitude. And that's not easy to find. People do evil. They steal, they rob, they embezzle, whatever they do. They speak Lashon Hara. Yes, might as well give that a plug. People do evil, exactly. But, okay, it's a low level. It's not easy to find a person that wants to kill millions of people in a way which is an absolute hara. Those people are unique. You don't have many people like that. So the Ribono Shel Olam looked around and he saw this guy, Hitler, Yamach Shemoy, that he is capable of that evil. So the Ribono Shel Olam stepped back and He said, I will give you success. In fact, that type of evil is so rare that what the Ribono Shel Olam did is He protected Hitler. Many times they wanted to kill the guy, Rommel. His own guys wanted to kill him. But he was always saved, sometimes miraculously. Why? He could have gotten somebody else. But the answer is it's not easy to find that level of evil in people. Therefore, the Ribono Shel Olam decided to preserve his life. For whatever reason, He decided that this has to be a decree. I'm not going into why. I'm just going into the mechanics of how it works. Clearly what happened is the Ribono Shel Olam said, that World Trade Center must be destroyed. Let me look around. And He saw there are guys that want to do it. And the Ribono Shel Olam said, do it. I will allow you incredible success. Where do you see that? Because if you take a look at the disaster is spectacular in its cunning and its evil. The United States spends $30 billion for intelligence information. The CIA, the FBI, the National Security Council. How is it possible that all that money couldn't tell the United States one single idea about what was about to happen? And these guys didn't start yesterday. They've been flying around taking lessons for years. And they were warned. The answer is because the Ribono Shel Olam wanted it to happen. Therefore, He denied the United States the access to that information. But besides that, what these people did was very unusual. Even they didn't figure out that they could destroy the World Trade Center and the very foundations of the center. Do you know what was destroyed? the complex of 9 acres are utterly destroyed, did they imagine that they could achieve such incredible success? I doubt it. They probably thought that they can put these 2 buildings on fire, but they didn't. Both buildings collapsed utterly to such an extent where the World Trade Center really goes down another 10 stories. They are afraid to dig out the debris because they're afraid that the retaining wall will break and the Hudson River will flow right into the complex. Imagine what type of destruction that is. Where did they get such success? Because the Rebbe Shem said, Ad ha-yesoid bo, until its very foundation. Even when the Rebbe Shem allows success to evil, he determines who, when, where, and how much. So all zero. So clearly what they did was a divine decree to utterly destroy the centers. This is the hand of God. And it's important for us to see that. Does everybody see that? Not at all. Friday, right after the World Trade Center disaster, they made Friday a day of prayer. So one of the reporters asked Bush, our president, what are you going to pray for? It's a good question. What did Bush answer? Bush said, I'm going to pray for the families, the victims, all those people, of course, that suffered terrible misfortune. Is that an answer that a Jew would give? Of course not. When Jews see calamity comes to them, what do they pray for? They know God does this. They know somehow there's something deficient or wanting. A Jew prays for divine guidance. Why did you do it? What do I have to repent on to ensure that this will not occur again? That's what a Jew does. A Jew makes a kinus of tshuva. Because we know that this isn't chance. How is it possible that our president, who's supposed to lead us, doesn't grasp this fundamental idea? And the answer, he doesn't, which is incredible. That is the beginning of the problem. Because they don't understand the amount of intervention that God has in the lives of human beings. And that's a big problem that he does not understand. But we Jews know the answer. We know what it is. When something happens that's terrible, we pray to God. We repent. We try to get the divine decree changed. This is what we see. And the truth is that this is the beginning of understanding of what is wrong in many ways with America. But it doesn't diminish the greatness of America as an Ummah Shel Chesed. But clearly there's something wrong. How do we look at this? In any given crime, there are levels of culpability. What does that mean? For instance, somebody robs a bank. So he's culpable, he's a perpetrator. Besides this guy, there's also the guy who drove the getaway car. He's a collaborator, right? Then there's the guy in whose house they made the plans. He's a contributor. Then there's a guy sitting around who helped them make the plans. He's also guilty and culpable. Not to the extent of the guy who robbed, but he's part of the guilt. Then there's a guy who's sitting at the table and says, listen, I don't want to get involved in this robbery, but I tell you, I wish you guys brocha v'hatzlacha. Yeah. He's also guilty because he's encouraging what? A crime. Everybody is guilty at a certain level. Many times we see people or we see nations which go through terrible dilemmas, terrible tragedies. When we look at them, we don't understand what they do. And you're right. We don't know what they did because in some way they are at the peripheral of the level of culpability that we do not see because they are not the perpetrator. But God sees, and everybody is held accountable at whatever level he was involved. The Holocaust is a classic example. There were the Nazis and the German people that killed the Jews. Then there were the people that stood by and did nothing. Then there were the people that clapped and were glad that the Jews were getting killed. Then there were the people that assisted the Nazis economically, like Switzerland. They are true collaborators with the Germans or the British. The British created the white paper which forbade the Jews to enter Israel. Hitler's killing them out in Europe, and the British, who had the mandate over Israel, which the League of Nations gave them, forbade the Jews from going into their own country. And they're being killed in Europe. Could you imagine what these guys are doing? The evil of what Britain did right before World War II? That's right. Most people don't know about this. But they committed an incredible act of evil. Each country, God knows what he did, and each one has a different level of retribution. That's a very important idea. Fine. Once we understand the concept of different levels of culpability, we have to examine America. I will make a statement which is startling. It's an honest statement. And I want to tell you something. There will never be peace in the Middle East. Do you know why? Because there is a prerequisite to peace. Do you know what that is? Truth and honesty. You must be honest. Who are the people causing the problems? You have to be honest. Who's the enemy? If you don't know who the enemy is, if you want to make believe because you have special interests, then how could you ever bring peace to a region? And that's exactly what has been happening for years. There is no honesty. There's a charade going on. By who? The startling idea is that America sponsors and legitimatizes terror. They really do. That's shocking. How? Let me give you a couple of examples. And we will be honest. I am not being politically correct now. I'm just being simply plain honest. America aids and abets Saddam Hussein in 1980 when he was making war against Iran. What are you doing? How do you do this kind of thing? These people, Hussein is a butcher. How do you give this guy weapons? For what? Because you have special interests? Because you want to curry favor with the guy for oil? You're not allowed to do this. You're not righteous. But they do it anyway. Clinton sits down with Hafez Assad, the dictator of Syria when he was alive. Do you know who Assad is? Syria is on the terror list. Assad is one of the greatest terrorists of all time. Not only that, in that country is where they counterfeit most of the US dollars. He's one of the biggest traffickers. So how does an American president sit down with a butcher like Assad? We know why he sat down. Because America doesn't care if it's not righteous, as long as it answers special interests. But God does care, because God judges the world not by what we need. He judges by what is righteous. And it is not righteous, it is sinful to legitimatize this man. Because what do you think the world sees? They see a guy, the American president, sit down with a dictator, a butcher. Please turn off your cell phones. They see Assad, they see America sit down with a dictator. What do you think the world thinks? He's a choshev guy. He's okay. America gives him credibility and dignity. That is a sin. That is forbidden to do that. Therefore, at some level of culpability, they don't commit terrorism, but at that level of culpability, they are guilty. Let's come up to what's happening now. In the year 2001, America sponsors terrorism. They sponsor the greatest terrorist of all time, the mother of all terrorists, Arafat. They sponsor him. What does that mean, that they sponsor him? Let me show you something. Imagine, you want to put your house up for sale. It's worth market value $500,000. You want to put it up for sale. Somebody comes in, broker brings him in. He says, okay, fine, let's negotiate. 6 months pass, and this guy says, so finally you see that it's not moving. So what you do is you drop the price by $150,000. So you say to the guy, listen, I'll give you my house for $350,000 off market value. That's good. That's tremendous. So you say to the guy, well, you expect the guy to jump at the offer. So what does the guy say? I'm not going to give you $350,000. So you ask the guy, so then how much do you want? So the guy says, I will give you $20 for your house. So you look at the guy and say, what, are you crazy? What are you wasting my time for? This isn't normal. This is not a negotiation. You want to give me $20 for a house that's worth $500, and which I am lowering to $350? Then the guy looks at you, and all of a sudden he jumps up and puts a gun to your head. And he says, you know, I'll pay you 10 cents for your house. How would you look at this situation? Would you say that this guy makes sense? Is this normal? Of course, you would look at it and say, this is incredible. This is absolute lunacy. Arafat convinces the world in 1993 that he's ready for peace. Right? Sits down. And Clinton and Rabin and Peres, people who were involved at that time, they say, fabulous. Who knows? Maybe Arafat spoke to Allah, and Allah said, hey, come on, let's make peace. Who knows? Maybe Arafat's doing tshuva. Who knows? What happens? And they start negotiating with Arafat. What does Arafat do shortly thereafter? He violates the agreement. He violates the agreement. Would anybody say that Israel is bound in any legal way to go through with it? Of course not. Would America go through with an agreement that they make with another country for peace purposes when the other country violates the agreement? Of course not. But America says, no, we don't care. You must sit down with this man. But, this guy's killing people. He's violating agreements. In terms of armaments, in terms of everything, we don't care. So America puts on pressure. Fine. Then along comes Barak. And he says, you know, in July 2000, Camp David Accords, I will give you everything. You can have the Gaza, the territories. You can have East Jerusalem. You can have the Temple Mount. And I'll tell you something, we will even ask your permission to pray at our wall. What does Arafat do? No, because he wants 4 million Arabs to come back. That's absurd. If 4 million Arabs come back, that's the end of Israel. They'll vote them out the next day. Therefore, what he's really doing is saying, you want to give me a house for $350,000? No, I want it for 20. You know, it's such an absurd offer, it's lunacy. How can we let 4 million Arabs come back? This man isn't serious at all. So not only does the United States not condemn him for what he's been doing for 7 years, violations, no reciprocity, they say nothing. And not only does the United States force Israel to sit down with an illegal action, they don't even go over to Arafat and say, excuse me, you made fools of us. You've been sitting down with us and negotiating for 7 years. You made us look like a fool because you don't even want what he's giving you, can't give you any more, right? You want what? 4 million Arabs? He has made fools of the entire world. Did you hear anybody protest? Of course not. But that's really what he's done. Then, what Arafat does is on Erev Rosh Hashanah of last year, he starts a war with Israel. And he kills Jews seriously. Not that it wasn't serious before, but he now does it as an active campaign. Well, that's equivalent to a guy standing up in front of you and saying, I want your house for a dime. It's ridiculous. Not only do you violate, and there's no reciprocity, not only did somebody give you an offer of which he's not capable of giving you any more, or else there's no offer, you actually now pull out a gun and start killing the guy? Why didn't anybody say anything? Nothing. All they tell Israel is no military option, no excessive force, exercise restraint. Do you understand what the evil is, how evil this is? Now we know why America does this. Because they want oil flowing. And in order to ensure oil flowing, you need stability in the region. So fine. So therefore you want to take the Jew and kill him because you want stability in the region? Would America ever have sat down with a guy in this kind of conditions? Of course not. I want to tell you something. We don't look at this. We're so immune and inured to this. We don't realize the evil of this. But God does. And He waits. He waits until specific ideas are finished. You know what it's like? It's like a guy who hunts tigers to give to a zoo. And all of a sudden he's in India, because that's where tigers are. And he sees a couple of cubs, tiger cubs. Looks around, mother's not around. Great chance. Goes over, starts taking the cubs and puts in the sack. 1, 2, 3. Figures fabulous. He's capturing baby cub tigers. He's going to sell them to a zoo. But he's playing games. It's a very dangerous game he's playing. He's taking some mother's tigers' kids. So he figures, but fine, she's not around. Turns around to return to his car, and all of a sudden he sees there's a mother tiger staring at him right in the face, 5 feet from him. What's the consequence of his actions? Dinner in 5 minutes. That's what God is. Sure, the nations play around with the Jews. It's like the Cubs. Play around. Nobody's looking. Who knows? They play around. But they don't realize that the mother tiger, who is God, watches them. And even if he doesn't strike now, you think it goes unpassed? Of course not. This is the dangerous game the nations of the world pass. Not only that, besides the unbelievable illegality of what this man did, Arafat, and the fact that no nation protests what is so obviously a tremendous act of breach of trust and faith and so on, America itself has a double standard. It's incredible. And God demonstrated it to the entire world. They're fighting in Afghanistan, right? They don't have to negotiate. They don't have to exercise restraint or excessive force, right? They can do whatever they want. And they tell Israel that they have to do this. The evil is incredible. And every man, woman, and child that dies, America is culpable. Every widow, every orphan, all those people that are harmed and mutilated, America is culpable at some level. But God waits. God waits. What happens now? So God decides, enough is enough. And we will see why I think God waited. Because the truth is, he should have exercised retribution a long time ago. Because his people are dying for such an incredible injustice. But God waits. And here's what he does. All of a sudden, after a certain time, there's a judgment. There's a judgment in America. Nothing happens without a divine decree. How do we know the reasons why God does anything? Because God acts with a concept called midah keneged midah, measure for measure. Whatever happens to a person, in many ways mirrors the sin or the crime that he did. Because that is absolute justice. And not only that, from the punishment, you can figure out the crime. Is it possible to figure out why God took this action based on the destruction? And the answer is yes. Imagine, you're in heaven, and you're standing there, and you're watching a tremendous judgmental judicial process taking place. And then you hear the verdict. Listen to the verdict, because that really is what happened. 1, God says, you are killing my people. At your level of culpability, you are killing my people, my Jewish people. I will kill yours. Now, we don't know why God chooses what he does, because all these people who are in the World Trade Center, of course they're innocent. We don't know that, but in some way God has decided that these people are the people that have to go out. We don't know, and we cannot examine his acts, because he and his acts are inscrutable. But this is his decision. But it's based on, so we don't know why he chooses those people. But the decision is obvious. You kill my people, I will kill yours. You destroy my capital. They're destroying my capital. You're letting these guys destroy Jerusalem, my holy capital. It just happened yesterday. They just blew Ben Yehuda Street. That's the center of Jerusalem. You guys say nothing? You destroy my capital? I will destroy yours. What is the capital of the United States? No, it's not Los Angeles. It is New York. New York is the greatest city on earth. That is the capital of the United States, not Washington. So God says, it will happen to your capital. Verdict 3, you are forcing my people to live in terror. Do you know what it is to live in terror? When you never know if you're going to come home that night to see your wife and kids, or whatever. When you don't know if the next day you'll be able to see the sunrise. Terror. You want to subject my people to terror? I will subject yours to terror. 4th verdict. You want to destroy my people's economy. You want to destroy their tourism, or whatever. Their economy is in shambles because of what's happening in Israel, the terrorism. You want to destroy my people's economy? I will destroy yours. That's why Los Angeles airport is empty. And then God finally says the following. You want to consort with terrorists? I want to tell you something. There's a lot of people that would have loved to have blown up the World Trade Center. The guy who tried in Oklahoma, he would have loved that. Except he wasn't able to. He couldn't get his hands on the right amount of stuff. But he would have loved to have taken out the World Trade Center. Why did God not choose him? God could easily have chosen the guy who blew up the building in Oklahoma. It's not a problem for God. And he could have allowed him to have the wherewithal to do it. Why? Because God says to the United States, and this is verdict 5, you want to consort with terrorists? They will destroy you, measure for measure. So God looks for Muslim terrorists. You're the guys I want, not some guy, some of the, the Americans, the extreme right-wing or nationalistic Americans. Measure for measure. You consort with them, they will destroy you. So he chooses Muslims, and he gives them success. Look at that. Mida keneged mida, one after the other. If that's not clear, I don't know what is. It should be very obvious for anybody who wants to examine the truth. But who wants to examine the truth? Very few people, really. America makes a fundamental mistake. Do you know what that is? America says, if you hear what they say, what is America always bragging about that they contribute to civilization? Freedom and democracy. Now, there's no question about that. That is very important. Of course it's important. We want freedom and democracy so people can pursue what they feel is important, especially religion. There's no question that that is a major contribution. But if you walked over to God and you asked him, what is the major contribution we should give to the world? If Bush walked over to God, so to speak, and he said to God, listen, I'm in charge here. At least I think I'm in charge. What do you want me to guide the American people with? Freedom and democracy? So God would say, no, that's not where it's at. It's not freedom I want, although it's important, no question. But it is not freedom I want, it is righteousness. Tzidkus. It is not democracy I want, it is holiness. Kedusha. Look at the Torah. It doesn't talk about freedom. It doesn't talk about democracy. The concept of freedom is expressed in V'yohavta kamocha. You don't want to be a slave. Why do it to the other guy? It doesn't say you should be free at all. It doesn't talk about these values. But how many times in the Torah does the Torah say righteousness and tzidkus? V'yisim nekiyim lifnei Hashem kedoshim tiyu. Again and again. Clearly, this is what the Rebbe wants. And that's what America doesn't understand. It is not freedom and democracy. It is righteousness and holiness. But that America does not understand. Tragically, it's a great tragedy that a country that has reached such great levels of generosity and charity and chesed should not understand the essential message. And they don't. The Jews do, because the whole Torah is saturated with that message. Why did God wait? These guys have been doing it. America's been doing it. All these guys have been doing it for years. Why wait? And the answer is a very important idea. Why God waited. There are 3 ways that the Jews bring the redemption. 1, they have to do the mitzvahs. They have to do the commandments. In that way, they bring down an enormous amount of divine energy and divine light, tremendous flow of holiness. What happens if the Jews don't do this? They don't do mitzvahs. So God says, do tshuva, repent. And that also will bring down a tremendous amount of holiness. But what happens if the Jews don't repent? So God has given the Jews a 3rd way, and that is called suffering or yisurin. What suffering does is that it atones, and by atoning for a Jew, it allows an enormous amount of light, kedusha, holiness, to enter the creation. 3 ways: mitzvahs, tshuva, and yisurin. Now, there's a problem, but if the Jews, by and large, select yisurin because they're not doing mitzvahs and tshuva, then there's something wrong. What is that? Let's take a look at Egypt. The Chazal tell us that the Jews were redeemed from Egypt even though they had suffered terribly for years under the Egyptians. Why were the Jews redeemed? Because they did not change their dress, their names, and their language. Chazal tells us that. So the question is, what does that have to do with redemption? And the answer is that even if the Jews suffer, in the end, a Jew has to identify as a Jew. He has to say, I'm Jewish. So therefore, when God takes them out, He is taking out Jews, not Egyptians. Had they dispensed with their language, their names, and their clothing, they would be no longer Jews. They would have given up the identifying characteristic of Jews. So, even if suffering is going to atone and bring the redemption, it's Jews I want to take out, not guys that dropped it all. God has, so to speak, kaviyachol, a tremendous problem. What is the problem? The problem is that as we approach the redemption, as we get closer to the Messianic era, many Jews are atheists. Many Jews hate Judaism, and they aid and abet people that want to destroy the Torah. Fine. So God has a way of getting around that. He brings suffering. And therefore that's an atonement. But wait a minute. A Jew is an atheist. Why is he a Jew? He has no identifying characteristics as being Jewish. We identify as Jews because we observe the Torah. That's how we say we're Jewish. And you can't go back on the original method, because think about it. Language, they didn't change their language. Jews are all over the world. All Jews speak different languages. Dress, take a look at how different Jews dress in Shabbos. Right? Names, Jews have different names from all countries. So the old method doesn't work anymore because Jews are dispersed. So then how is God going to get the Jews to identify? And without that, then they're not Jews, so to speak. God has to give them a way to identify. What is God going to do? And we're not talking about one Jew here. We're talking about many, many Jews, thousands and tens of thousands of Jews that have left the fold. So how does God bring them back? So what the Rebbeinu Shalom does is very interesting. He creates a process. He says, I'm going to create a process that's going to bring the Jews back. What is that process called? The answer to this, and it's be very surprising, the name of this process, that the real purpose of this process is to bring the Jews back, is Oslo, the Oslo peace process. And you look at me and say, what? The Oslo peace process? What does that have to do with Jews identifying with Judaism? Yes, not easy to see. But let's see if it makes sense. Arafat sits down with Clinton and Rabin, and he says, hey, I'm doing tshuva. I'm ready for peace. But I want land. Now, forgetting about if that makes any sense at all. But okay, everybody's hoping, boy, this guy's going to change. Let's give him land. Fine. What's the first thing in 1993 that they want to give Arafat? Yericho, Jericho. Jericho? So all of a sudden there's a certain amount of Jews that say, Jericho, you want to give the guy, give him some place in a lot somewhere. Jericho, Yericho is the city where Yoshua brought down. It's one of the oldest cities on earth. How do you give Jericho in Tanakh? So all of a sudden 10,000 Jews say, no, we can't give back Jericho because that's part of our land. So God says, aha, so you people feel you're Jews because you don't want to give back Jericho? Fine, you're in. You get Ulam Haba. But then many, many thousands of Jews, hundreds of thousands of Jews say, who cares? Give it back. So God does, He lowers the threshold. What's next on the block? Shechem and the territories. Shechem and the territories, the city where Yosef HaTzadik is buried, Judea and Samaria, how do you do that? So 100,000 Jews get up and say, no, you can't do this. So God says, you're in. But there's still hundreds of thousands, millions of Jews that, who cares, give it back. So what happens next? What's on the block? Hebron. Hebron? 500,000 Jews say it cannot be. The city of the Ovos, the Ma'oras HaMachpelah, how could you do this? So 500,000 Jews say, no, don't do it. So God looks at them and says, aha, so you have a Jewish field? You're in. And then how many Jews say, who cares? Give it back. What's next on the negotiating table? Jerusalem. That's why. So all of a sudden, 500,000 Jews get up and say, how can you get 1 million Jews, whether you're reformed or conservative or you're atheist, it didn't make a difference. Every nation has a historical basis. How do you give back Jerusalem? This is your history. So therefore, who knows how many Jews said no to East Jerusalem? So God said, fabulous, you're in. But there are still some Jews that say, who cares? So God said, okay, I want every Jew to be in the future world. When I redeem the Jews, it's going to be everybody. But how do you convince everybody? So the score lowers. To what? The Har HaBayis, the Temple Mount. The Temple Mount, millions of Jews get up and say, listen, that's Judaism. How do you give back the Har HaBayis? That's where the temple stood. The identity of Judaism is a Temple Mount. So most of the Jewish people, probably 98% of the Jewish people said, no, we will not do it. So God said, absolutely fabulous. And you're in. The rest of the people said, some small 2%. You know, Jews are a stiff-necked people. Talk about an auction. So 2% said, give it back. Who cares? All of a sudden, as soon as the Har HaBayis is on the block, July of 2000, the whole Oslo process collapses. Because that's the end of Oslo. The whole purpose of Oslo on a divine agenda is to bring the Jews back. Unfortunately, God has to bring them back through something that we don't even understand. We laugh at this. Anybody think that we would give back Jerusalem? But these guys were atheists, secularists, leftists, and so on. Unfortunately, they need this to identify as Judaism. But what about those 2%, right? Is God going to neglect them and say, who cares? No. Because God loves Jews. He doesn't want the Jews to be outside of the redemption process. But how are you going to come up with a feat of getting these guys back? Oslo is gone, collapsed in July. So God says, apparently you guys still believe that Arafat wants peace. So all of a sudden God allows Arafat to do the intifada. And all of a sudden, what? This is the equivalent to the guy who puts the gun to the guy's head and says, I'll take your house for 20 cents. So all of a sudden, everybody realizes this man's a madman. Not only does he not negotiate, but he actually wants to kill you because you don't want to give him everything. Do you know how many people from the left switched over to the right? Almost everybody. Guys were writing column articles day in and day out that, yes, we have to sit down with Arafat, all of a sudden began singing a different tune. So, which is incredible. So 1% of the Jewish people say, it's over with, there is no peace. So God says, you're in. But there's still 1% left. What do? If the Intifada doesn't convince them, then what will? Well, God pulls out the last ace. Why is it these people think that there's still possibility of peace? And the answer is because, how could there be? I mean, this guy's a lunatic. Forget about Arafat. We're not dealing here with a normal person. Actually, he is a normal person. It's we who are not normal. But in any case, what is God going to do? So God says to himself, Kaviyachol, wait a minute. These guys, they're not going to learn because they think, what? That maybe Arafat can do it, but then they realize Arafat can't do it because of the Intifada. But the 1% have one more idea. They say this, that even if Arafat doesn't want to do it, the world will make him do it. Yes, the world will make this guy make peace because the world wants peace. Doesn't the world recognize the legitimacy of Jews to Israel? And therefore they will make him make peace? What happens? The United Nations has a conference in Durban, South Africa. Why? You think it's because they wanted to talk about racism? No. The purpose of that conference, ultimately, on the agenda of God, is to delegitimize the Jewish right to Israel. These guys were incredible. What the Arabs did is they influenced the conference where the whole agenda became an anti-Semitic agenda. So all of a sudden, in the first week of September, they came out with an unofficial resolution that Israel has no legitimate right to their own state. Forget about a Palestinian state. To their own state, they don't have a legitimate right. Wait a minute. There goes the hope. Even the world says Arafat is right. So that's the last possible reason why we think there can be a peace. That ended the Oslo process, really. Because it ended the rationale for anybody to think that peace is possible. That is the end of the process to bring the Jews back. God says, we're finished. Now the retribution starts. That was the first week in September. What happened in the second week? September 11th, World Trade Center disaster. That's what God's waiting for. Because He needs this process to bring the Jews back. As soon as the process is over, which is Durban, South Africa, because that's the real end of the process, to convince the Jews that you have to rely on me, it will never happen, then automatically the World Trade Center occurs. Because the process is over, now the retribution begins for the terrible evil that America has been doing to the Jewish people. You know, it's very interesting. God warned America before this. Whenever God is about to do something, He always warns people. How did He warn America? He warned America and He said to them, watch it. Don't fool around with my cubs. He gave them a warning, but nobody read it. You know what the warning was? When did the Oslo process start? In September 13th, 1993. Do you remember that they tried to bomb the World Trade Center in February of 1993? Why? Because God said, this is what I'm going to do to you after Oslo. And I'm warning you before Oslo. But now I will inform you of what they're doing. Because it is not my desire that they bomb the World Trade Center. So several months before the Oslo starts, God warns America. He says, you see that building there? Watch it. Don't tamper with my cubs. But they did. So the week after the process is over, World Trade Center collapses. Do you think this is an accident? Do you think it just happened to be that they didn't get away with the first time and they got away with the second? Look at the timing. Therefore, God warned America, but did not heed the warning. Therefore, the second dimension of this is the concept of the retribution that God has taken against America. Because only a certain amount of time will God tolerate the violation of His children, of His cubs. And He waits because He has an agenda. We are now going to enter the third dimension, which is the divine plan itself. What is the divine plan really? At least as it reflects itself or addresses Oslo. God knows that the Jewish people will not always do the mitzvahs. They will not always repent. Tshuva. So therefore God says, I'm going to assign a persecutory status to certain nations. 4 nations. There are 4 nations that will subjugate the Jews. They will be my agents. That if the Jews need a wake-up call, or if they need suffering, these 4 nations will do it. Yeah. Who are they? Babylon, Bovel, Porus, Persia, Yovan, Greece, and Rome. It's the nation called Rome. These are the 4 nations that will persecute the Jews. And God assigns them, remember, the agency that if my people need suffering as an atonement, and you guys want to do it, I will give you success. Who is Rome? Well, actually, if we take a look, the first nation is Babylon. They destroyed the first temple. The second nation, of course, is Persia, the story of Purim, and their desire to kill the Jews. The third nation is Greece, and of course Hanukkah, which is 1 week from tonight. And the fourth nation is Rome, which of course destroyed the second temple. But who is Rome? Rome, we are still under the nation called Rome. Now they disappeared 2,000 years ago. And even the Byzantine Empire disappeared 600 years ago. So then who's Rome? Who is Rome today really? Well, who Rome is the following. Rome starts off with Esav. Esav comes in front of Yitzchak, his father, and he says, I'm here. Where are my blessings? So Yitzchak says to him, blessings? I just gave them to you. So Esav says, what do you mean you gave them to me? I'm Esav, your firstborn. So his father says, I have nothing left. I mean, I gave it away. So Esav starts crying, and he says to him, don't you have anything left for me? And those tears has caused us terrible consequences. But Esav says to his father, don't you have anything left for me? So Yitzchak says, I do. I will give you a blessing. So Yitzchak says to Esav that Yaakov and his descendants have dominion. But if they do the mitzvahs, they will retain that dominance. But if they sin, you will persecute them. Wow, what a bracha, right? What is that? How can Yitzchak do this to Jews? He actually told Esav that if the Jews sin, you're the guy that's going to persecute them? Yes, but does this make sense? Of course it does. What did Yitzchak really say? Yitzchak knew that God is going to assign the task of bringing persecution and suffering to the Jews to different nations. So he said, one of the nations will be you. That's all. He's not telling Esav to persecute the Jews, but he's saying if they need the persecution because it conforms to the agenda of God, that they need suffering, your nation, your descendants will be it. Why is that a blessing? Because the rule is that God, since He loves Israel, even though He decides that He has to put them in suffering in a nation, He will not put His children in a low-class nation. Because it is debasing for Jews to be punished by slaves or low-class people. Therefore God says, any nation which persecutes the Jews, I will elevate to greatness. They will become a superpower. Therefore that's the bracha, that Esav will become a superpower. And that's the bracha he wants when God picks him to bring persecution or suffering to the Jew. Therefore, Esav's descendants are the major persecutory agent of God when he wants the Jews to suffer. Who is Esav? So the Torah says, Esav zu Edom. Who's Edom? The Edomites. Who are they? So the Gemara says, Edom zu Roimi is Rome. But who's Rome? What the Russian did is something very interesting. Since the Romans are the nation that is chosen, and these are the descendants of Esav, to persecute the Jews because it conforms to the agenda, but they will do it for 2,000 years. So the Russian doesn't want Esav to be a superpower for such a long time. And not only that, since the Jews will be exiled, it would mean that Rome would be a superpower for 2,000 years over the entire world. And the Russian doesn't want it. So what the Russian does is he changes the nature or form of Rome to a religion. And that religion is the persecutory agent of God. What religion is that? Christianity. That's what Christianity is. Christianity is nothing more than the spiritual heir of Rome, and it is their task, if they so choose, because God doesn't make them do it, then they will be the persecutory agent, and God will stand out of the way and allow them to succeed. This is who Rome became, Christianity. And of course, who is Christianity today? Western civilization. Western civilization is Christian. Therefore, the one who is now Rome is Western civilization or Christianity. Now you may say to me, wait a minute, that Christianity, is that the real persecutory agents of God? And I will say yes. How do we know this? I will tell you. Do you know how many Jews there were in Judea 2,000 years ago? Historians estimate that there were approximately from 6 to 9 million Jews. The entire world had close to 300 million people. But there were 6 to 9 million Jews 2,000 years ago. Historians estimate also that there were how many Chinese 2,000 years ago? There were approximately 25 million Chinese. How many Chinese are there today? Over 1 billion. Therefore, if they start out 2,000 years ago with 25 million and they now reach 1 billion, that's a 40 times increase rate. 25 times 40 is over 1 billion. Fine. Let me ask something. That's the Chinese. What about the Jews? We also were around 2,000 years ago, and we were, let's say, 9 million people. Therefore, if the Jews multiplied 40 times 9 million is 360 million people. 360 million people. Do you see 360 million Jews? How many Jews are there in the world? 14. You mean to tell me there's only 5 million more Jews in 2,000 years? It's impossible, but there is. There's supposed to be 360 million people. Do you know what the significance of that? Can you imagine 360 million Jews? That means that there would be 720 million synagogues. Because every Jew has to have at least 2 synagogues. This is what is called a fundraising nightmare. Why are there not 360 million Jews? And the answer is because they were killed by Christians. That's right. That's what's been going on for 2,000 years. Hitler killed 6 million. Do you know how many Jews were killed by Khmelnytsky, the massacre of the Jews, or the pogroms of Russia, or how many Jews were killed in the Black Plague, or how many Jews were killed in Britain when they burnt them up in the Tower, and Leeds and so on, or York rather, or how many Jews were killed in the Crusades, or the Inquisitions? Millions and millions of Jews. We don't even know because it's so far back. There should be 360 million Jews. And I'll tell you something, there should be much more because the Jews go back 2,000 years earlier. Avraham Avinu was 4,000 years ago. There should be over 1 billion Jews today. The Jews should number the greatest population or nation on earth, if not for the fact that the Christianity killed them relentlessly for thousands of years. Staggering. Now you understand what it means to be a persecutory agent of the Rebbeinu Shalom. If you look in the Torah, you see clearly that Esav had 3 distinct characteristics. 1, he was a tremendous Baal Gaiva, tremendous Geus, because he said, an arrogant person, because it says in the Torah, Vayivas Esav es ha-bechorah, and Esav despised the birthright, which is a spiritual right to a family. Arrogance. Besides that, Esav was a fraud. He was a deceiver. He was always trying to pass himself off as a righteous person to his father. A fraud, deceiver. And besides that, Esav was also about taiva. He loved pleasure. He was big time into pleasure. If that's the case, if you look at Western civilization, you will see that they are divided in 3 ways, also based on these characteristics. Who is the nation that took over the arrogance of Esav? And the answer to that is communist Russia. Russia was Christian, the Russian Orthodox Church. However, for 70 years, Russia became communist, which is such incredible amount of arrogance, because atheism is the epitome of arrogance. Look at what Russia did in 70 years. They almost brought the world to the brink of disaster. How much evil was perpetrated by that evil empire. Therefore, God said that the arrogance of Esav is so bad, I will only allow communism to exist for 70 years. Who is the deception of Esav? Europe. Because Europe is fundamentally Christian. And Christianity is a fraudulent religion. How do we see this? More people were killed in the name of Christianity than all the wars combined. What do they say? They pass themselves off as righteous, right? They say, right, turn the other cheek. But they forget to tell you that it's your cheek that they turn, not theirs. This is what Christianity is a fraudulent religion. And I always wonder to myself, the Pope, what is a man who represents a religion that butchered millions and millions of people because they wouldn't convert? Where does he get the chutzpah, the gall, to tell people that they should embrace peace and loving kindness? You're talking about chutzpah. In any case, that's Europe. Who is the pleasure-loving aspect of Esav? We know who it is. It's Los Angeles. No, it's America. America is the pleasure-loving aspect of Esav. America's Esav. It's Edom. It's Christian. But it's the pleasure-loving aspect, therefore it's the softest touch. It's the kindness of them all. Therefore they have the chesed of Avram, they have the generosity and so on. It's the softest. Not only that, you see a very interesting concept. America is what's called the Tov Shebe Esav, the good aspect of Esav. But remember, there's still Edom or Esav. Where do we see this? Because Esav did what? Esav did an incredible mitzvah. In fact, he was one of the people that was the greatest in the performance of this mitzvah, which was Kibbud Ovaim, honoring your father and mother. That's right. Let me ask something. Who originated Mother's Day and Father's Day? It's America. America. That's who did it. Why? Because that's the nature of Esav. Which holiday is one of the greatest of all the holidays? It's not Christmas. Christmas is a business holiday. It is Thanksgiving, because the concept of family is, of course, the concept of Thanksgiving. You know, the Jews always bemoan the fact, Christmas, 60%, I think that's the percentage of business takes place in those times. The Jews always bemoan the fact that the founder of Christianity didn't have a brother that was born in July. Then the whole year would have been covered. In any case, America. But don't make a mistake. As gentle and kind as America is, because it is the good part of Esav, it is capable of being a persecutory agent. This is what's very important to understand. But it usually doesn't happen. But the incredible thing is that we are now seeing it happen now. The thing is that America will never come out and be anti-Semitic like Europe. Europe was openly anti-Semitic, and they still are to this day. But America doesn't come out because in the 20th century, the world has learned to become much more sophisticated in anti-Semitism. They no longer say, we hate you Jews and we want to kill you. What they now say is that what? We are righteous, we want peace, and therefore you must give up the land of Israel. You've got to allow the Arabs in. They masquerade behind a veneer of righteousness. Remember Christianity, the fraud? Because it's no longer fashionable to hate Jews openly. So they masquerade under some incredible virtue called peace and loving kindness. But make no mistake, it's the same anti-Semitism that we've seen for thousands of years. What is happening now? I've explained the retribution aspect of the World Trade Center. Now let me begin to explain what is happening beyond that, which is really the third dimension. Jews have a certain quality. They are called Jews, but the quality they have is very interesting. They mirror the divine presence. The Shekhinah, the divine presence, has two important attributes, among many things. It has Tiferes, beauty, and Oiz, might. Kabbalistically, that would refer to the Tiferes and the Malchus, whatever. But the Jews have that. They have Tiferes and Oiz. When Jews sin and they go into exile, and a nation is given the right to persecute them, then this beauty and might goes into the hands of the nation that persecutes them. That's where it goes. However, when the beginning of the end is near, in the sense that the Jews are now no longer being persecuted by this nation, when the persecutory ability of a nation begins to end, then the Jews get back the Tiferes and Oiz, the beauty and might, and symbolically, the nation that persecutes them, something happens that symbolically shows it. Let me ask you something. Besides the retribution that God did after the Oslo process on America, there was something else. Remember what I said? That when God decrees it's not that evil should be done, He says to who, when, where, and to what. What was destroyed or bombed on the September 11th? You know what the answer is? Two things. The Pentagon. What is the Pentagon the symbol of? Might. Oiz, dominance. And the World Trade Center. The World Trade Center is a symbol of what? Beauty. Why? Because what beauty is the advancement and the sophistication of a civilization. And the World Trade Centers was the symbol of the incredible technology, wealth, and materialistic ability of America. Beauty and might. Why? Because what we're witnessing now, as we will see, is that the Torah Ohr, we are literally near the end, and God is taking away, or rather, more accurately, Torah Ohr's beauty and might is now slowly going back to the Jewish people. Therefore, God indicates how, by the destruction of these two aspects in a nation which is fundamentally Esav. Do you know that most times, if you look at the Parsha or the Haftarah of that week, in some way the events of the week are reflected in the Parsha. Do you know that? And this is a famous understanding that many people have. What was the Parsha that was read during the week of the World Trade Center? It was Nitzavim. In Nitzavim itself, that God talks to the Jews. Then he says to them, if you do not do my will, I will overturn you. A ma'apecha like Sodom and Amorah. Interesting. But what's even more interesting is the Haftarah. The Haftarah that we read in Parshas Nitzavim is a Haftarah that comes out of Yeshayahu, Isaiah, and it's 61, 62, and 63, where Yeshayahu talks about the redemption of Israel. And in the first verse of 63, he says the following. He has a vision, a prophetic vision. And he says the following. He sees the Jewish people looking in the distance. And all of a sudden, the Jewish people say the following. Mize bo me Edom. Who is he who comes from Edom? Edom, Esav. Bloodstained clothing. Who is coming from Edom and his clothing are filled with blood? So all of a sudden God answers. This is a prophecy. God answers and says, it is I who speaks in righteousness, which means that the act which I just did to Edom, and therefore I'm filled with blood, it's righteousness. They deserved it. So the Jewish people look at God and they say, wait a minute, why is your garments red like somebody who steps in a wine press? They squash the grapes and the color of the grapes red splashes on the garments. Why does your garments look like that? So God says, I come alone and none of the nations are with me because I have just exacted vengeance on Edom. I have stepped on him like a wine press, a person who trods on a wine press, and my clothing got filled with blood. This is a prophecy. Can you imagine the language that God is using? And God says, this deed has been in my heart for a long time. And the year of redemption has arrived. Therefore, we see that there's a tremendous act of vengeance against Edom before the beginning of the Messianic process. Let's take a look at that event or that Haftarah. Can it apply to September 11th? The truth is it does. Let me show you how. Mize bo me Edom. The Jewish people say to God, who is coming from Edom and the clothing are splattered with blood? What is the imagery of the prophet? When the prophet sees an image of blood-splattered clothing, that means that God has done a violent act, brutal. You could take a sword and thrust the guy and he dies. You don't get spilled with blood. It doesn't splatter. But if you take your sword and you cut him in half, then you get filled with blood. That's a brutal act. If you look at the World Trade Center and you look at it carefully, do you know that was an incredibly brutal act? Do you know why? Not only because 5,000 people died. No, it's much more than that. Many times there's a calamity, earthquakes. Thousands of people die all the time. But there was something especially unique about the brutality of the destruction of the World Trade Center. Do you know what it was? Besides the number, the first thing is that when the World Trade Center went down, there are no bodies. There's no bodies. Usually when there's a disaster, there are bodies. And therefore a person can do closure on the body. He buries the person, and there's a psychological closure. There's no bodies. It's all buried under 1 million tons of debris. That's how much that place weighed. There's not even bodies, they're all molecules. That's it. They'll never find bodies. It's unusual, it's an incredible act of brutality that there are no bodies even in the calamity. The second unusual act is that the destruction was total, utter, down to the foundations. The complete World Trade Center complex was destroyed, all 9 acres. Unusual. And not only that, the last thing is highly unusual. There's a calamity, and there are rescuers, matzilim. They come in and they save whoever's there. But we see that the people who tried to rescue other people, they were all killed. The firemen, 300 firemen died. 150 policemen died. That's a disaster, because even the matzilim, even the rescuers died. What does this mean? Now, I don't know why they died. I don't know who they are and why God said they are the ones. We don't know, because we do not know the individual soul of people and what their Gilgulim are, transmigrations. We have no idea. But one thing we see, rescuers usually don't die. Not 450 or 500 rescuers. And it's interesting that it says in Hazinu, Ani memes, I kill, God says. V'ani chaye, and I give life. V'ein mi yodi matzel, and from my hand there is no rescue. If I want somebody to die, he's dead. Apparently the decree against the World Trade Center was so absolute that it must happen, that God said, he who comes to rescue must join them. They not only cannot be a rescue, even the rescuers will die because they attempted to rescue. That is brutal. That is blood-stained clothing. Talk about an act of vengeance. Now again, I don't know why they died. They're all innocent people. God knows. And I have no idea why he chooses things. But I do know one thing. God doesn't kill rescuers. Not 450 or 500 people that shouldn't have been there in the first place. That's the imagery of blood-stained clothing. And God says, further, I am alone, and none of the nations are with me. That's why I had to do it myself. And the commentary is right. What did God say? God said the following: none of the nations are with me to help me. Instead, they all went against the Jewish people. Therefore, I go alone. Why is God referring to the nations not being with him? What's the difference? Who cares? God should just say, I did it alone, that's it. What are you mentioning? That none of the nations are with me. Because it would seem that God is referring clearly to an event that just occurred. That he wanted the nations to be with him, they didn't, so God did it alone. What's he talking about? Durban, South Africa. The week before is when the nations openly defied the legal status of the sovereign state of Israel. And they said that Israel has no legitimate right, the whole world. So God says, none of the nations are with me. He's referring to an event which just happened, or else it wouldn't be in the Navi. And the incredible thing is that the Baruch Shem says, what? Is that I come alone, none of the nations, and I've been thinking about this for a long time. Why? Because it should have happened at the beginning of Oslo. But it didn't. I waited because I have to complete the Oslo process. My people are infinitely more important than any retribution. But once it's over, the first week of September, retribution. The next week, that's what God says. I've been planning this a long time. Why? Because the year of redemption has come. Now you're saying, wait a minute. Okay, if we accept these ideas, the concepts of retribution and the evil, and that in the prophet of the week that had happened is referring to an act of vengeance against Edom. Right? So then why didn't God why did he allow the fourth plane to go down? Can that be explained? Because we know 3 planes found their target. Why not the fourth? And we know the fourth obviously didn't make it. We also know where the fourth was headed, for the White House. Why? Because it's interesting that at any given moment a person can do tshuva, and for a moment America did tshuva, but it wasn't enough. Where? Because they walked out of Durban. So God said, aha, you finally stood up for Israel? Yashikoyach. Therefore, I will change my decree slightly, measure for measure. you walked out and preserved the dignity of my people, I will preserve your dignity. Which means that the plane aimed at the White House will not hit it. You have any idea what loss of dignity America would have had if the White House would have been destroyed? Forget about the World Trade Center and the Pentagon. The White House is the image of America. You have an idea what kind of a busha, an embarrassment that would have been for America? How did they get to the White House? America would be the laughing stock of the world. So God changed his decree slightly. Why? Because America did tshuva. The last minute, they walked out. So God said, you preserve the dignity of my people, I will preserve your dignity. That plane won't find its mark. The others will. So you say, wait a minute. If America walked out, so why not reverse the decree of retribution? Because they didn't do enough. What does America say by terrorists? Those people who do terrorism, we will search and hunt you and find you, including the people who harbor. How can America harbor the United Nations? How do you keep a group of people, I don't care who it is, that commit such a terrible act of betrayal of trust? It doesn't make sense. Because America should have gone further, and they didn't. What they did is great. Therefore, God saved them from the greatest indignity of all, which is the destruction of the White House. And that's exactly what have happened. The utter destruction of the White House. Instead, God preserved their dignity. But since they did not do tshuva gemura, they didn't really do a tshuva, because they didn't confront the United Nations and say to them, get out of New York. We don't want this evil. Because do you have any idea what it means that the entire world condemns Israel? No friends, nothing. It's frightening when you think about that. Israel is, the way Chazal say, they are what? They are sheep with 70 wolves. Literally. So you want to do tshuva, then do tshuva. But they didn't. So therefore the other three got through, and this failed. Mida keneged mida. You see? God waits for tshuva, but it's got to be enough. It's interesting. Besides the symbolism of Tiferes, beauty, which the World Trade Center signified, there is something else which I believe is critical to know. It says in Tehillim, Kuf Lamed Zayin, that Edom says the following. This is Edom, the Tehillim is repeating the words of Edom. Oru, Oru, I will destroy until its very foundations. What are they talking about, Esav or Edom? They are talking about the following. Edom says, I will destroy the first temple. I will destroy the second temple until the very foundations. And that's exactly what Edom did. So you can imagine the verdict. Once God decides to give this terrible act of vengeance against America, also known as Esav or Edom, even if it's the better kind, but remember, Edom still has the persecutory shlichus agency, even though they don't do it very often, but they are doing it. So God says, once I'm going to exact retribution, then I'm going to take down the buildings which are equivalent to my temple. One World Trade Center is your most beautiful building. That's first. It parallels my temple. The second World Trade Center, that is the parallel of my second temple. And just like you said that you want to take out the temples until the very foundation, I will take out both centers, World Trade Centers, down to the bottom, to the very foundations. Look at the Mida Keneged Mida. It's a staggering when you think about what happened with those centers. It's interesting that the World Trade Centers were destroyed on September 11th, the year 2001. What was the Hebrew date? Chov Gimel Elul, Tovshin Samach Aleph, the 23rd day of Elul, 5761. Do you know what the numerical? Everybody here knows what a gematria is. When the numerical value of letters equal other phrases, that there's a significance to it many times. The numerical value of what? Of Chov Gimel Elul, 23rd day of Elul, Tovshin Samach Aleph, is equal to 851. That is exactly equal to Bi'ito Achisheno. In its time, I will hasten it. That's what it's equal. And that is the phrase which God uses to say, I am going to bring the Moshiach. That's the phrase. Not only that, it's also equal to this phrase. Bozeh, with this, Bias Moshiach ben David. The Moshiach ben David comes. That means it's the beginning of a process, a messianic process. Very, very interesting. Okay, that is the third dimension. The concept of retribution. And the concept that in some way that once God decides to exact retribution, then there are all kinds of ideas and parallels that go into it. But now we go down to the fourth level. What is really happening? And in many ways, this is really what's happening. We know that God assigns the persecutory agency to 4 nations: Babylon, Persia, Greece, and Rome. Fine, that we know. But wait a minute, that's interesting. Look at the sequence. It's an interesting thing when you look at them. You notice that as these 4 nations, there's always an improvement on these nations. Babylon is fundamentally pagan. Persia destroyed Babylon, and Persia, even though it's pagan, is much more materialistic. It's not as bad. Then all of a sudden, there's Greece. Greece is philosophy and science. That's an improvement on the previous nation. They're more what's called menschlich. They're more sophisticated. The 4th nation is Christianity, or Rome, which of course is the bearer of Greek civilization. But Christianity, in many ways, really did away with paganism. They have their God that they worship is basically God with a multiple personality of 3 people. No, he's not bipolar, he's multiple personality. No. Their God never gets depressed. He's always manic. So it's not bipolar. Why is that? Why is it we see that the nation improves, that the persecutory agent improves as time goes on? And the reason for that is a very fascinating idea. The Satan. The Satan is always trying to switch the Jews for another nation. That's his favorite argument in the heavenly court. He always says to God, listen, what do you need him for? Take somebody else. Why does he say that? Because it's interesting. When a Jew does a mitzvah, or repentance, and even if a Jew suffers, because they're all redemption devices, they bring down an incredible amount of divine flow, divine light. When a Jew sins, what happens to this divine energy? It doesn't stop, it's diverted to the Satan. That's what happens. When we do wrong, we don't just stop holiness. What we do is we give the holiness to the Satan, the side of evil. He uses it, it energizes him, and therefore he's able to do what he wants. It's a very important relationship that the Jewish people have with the Satan. We give life to evil. That's what we do. If all the Jews would only do mitzvahs, then the Satan would die. We're the guy that feeds him. By doing sins, we always take our energy and give it to him. And therefore he takes what we give him and uses it to give success to the nations, to persecute us. That's really the mechanism of how God works in terms of using persecutory agents. Therefore, the nations of the world, the kingship of these nations exists because of the sins of the Jews, because we are always feeding them. But it's interesting, when the Jews suffered under Babylonia and they destroyed the temple, what happened to Babylon? Collapsed. Why? Because the Jews, by suffering, took out all the flow, all the divine energy, all the holiness. When the Persians, the Jews were on the Persian, and Purim, and the Jews did tshuva, what did they do to Persia? Took out the energy, and ultimately Persia collapsed. When the Jew was in Greece, Hanukkah, and the Jew forced himself to what? To wage war, the Jews took out that energy from Greece, and what happened to Greece? Collapsed. Many times you see that, even by Spain. When the Spain kicked out the Jews in 1492, In less than 30 years, and they were the world power, in 30 years they were destroyed by the British Armada. Again, they collapsed. What does it mean that the Satan always wants to replace Jews with who? With non-Jews. The Akedah. What was the real test of the Akedah? The test was as follows. It wasn't only that God told Abraham to kill his son. No, it was something else. Abraham was a brilliant person. Brilliant. The only real test to him would be something that is illogical or irrational. So God said, I'm going to give him the best test. I'm going to appear to him as irrational. How? Because God said one prophecy, through Yitzchak will come the descendants, the Jews, and then all of a sudden God says, sacrifice your son. Hey, that's a contradiction. God is a God of truth. It's impossible for God, the same God, to have uttered both prophecies. So Abraham thought to himself, Avraham says, what is this? God appears to me irrational. It's impossible. So Avraham Avinu said to himself, listen, I don't understand the Rebbeinu Shalom, but one thing I know, that he and his acts are inscrutable. Somewhere below those commandments or prophecies, it makes sense. But I don't know what that is. As far as I'm concerned, I will go to the limits to worship God. And right then and there, in the morning, he took Isaac, Yitzchak, to sacrifice him on the altar. Fine. Then he starts sacrificing him, and of course the Malach from heaven, who represents God, says, stop. Ati udati. Now I know, ki yirei Elokim ato, that you are a God-fearing person. So the question is, what do you mean now I know that you're a God-fearing person? God knew before. So Rashi explains what that means. What do you mean now I know? Because God says, until now I had a tremendous problem. With who? With the Satan and the nations of the world, the Umas Olam. They sit there and say, what do you need the Jews for? What's the basis of your love? Switch them. And I had nothing to answer the Satan. But now I have something to answer. I can beat that argument in court. What is the argument that I can use? I say this, that if the Jew, Avram, doesn't want to what? Abandon me, even when I appear to him as irrational? If he doesn't want to abandon me, no matter how I appear to him, how can I abandon him? Midah keneged midah, measure for measure. Do you have anybody that can even do what Avram did? So the Satan is silent, because he loses. How's he going to beat that argument? But the Satan is always trying to use that argument. Therefore, this is what he does. The Satan, all of a sudden, he wants to use the argument, what do you need the Jews for? The Babylonians, they're fabulous people. Why not take them? The Jews worship idols. Babylonians, fine. Why the Jews? So Jews suffer under the Babylonians, and because they suffer, or mitzvahs and tshuva, they raise or elevate themselves, and they bring down more holiness, because remember, all three bring down holiness. So the Satan can no longer use Babylon as an argument, because the Jews are holier. He's got to up it. So he goes to what? He goes to Persia. Persia, he can use Persia because Persia becomes a better argument than Babylon. So what do the Jews do? They do tshuva. They elevate themselves, so he can no longer use Persia. So he goes to Greece, the chokhmah of Greece, the beauty of Greece. Aha! What do you need the Jews for? Take the Greeks. These men are thinkers, they're intellectuals. They'll understand your word. So the Jews go into Greece, they suffer. And then of course they suffer, and they bring down more holiness because of their suffering. So the Satan can't use Greece anymore. So he's got to turn to who? Rome, Christianity, because Rome's religion, Christianity, is much better than paganism. It's 3 instead of 300. So therefore the Satan says, hey, Christians, why not give it to them? First of all, they believe in the Torah, the scriptures. Great. And not only that, they worship you. They believe in only 3. Okay, it's not 1, but listen, it's not too bad, right? They believe in 3. Why not? So that's the argument. That's why there's always a contest here. But all of a sudden it comes the day when the Jews have rectified 98% of creation. So the Satan has a big problem. Christianity won't do. Can't use them as an argument. who is the Satan going to use? So he turns to the holiest nation on earth, other than the Jews. Who are they? Yishmael, the Arabs. Let's understand really who the Arabs are, and you will understand what is going on. Why all of a sudden these are the guys of the hour? Because the Satan is in a jam. The Jews are too holy, and even though there's whatever going on, there's a lot of assimilation, but the Jews have suffered. The sufferings of the Jews has elevated them to an enormous stature. There are many other signs, without going into it. But in any case, so the Satan now must reach out for the only one that can provide, at this time, a true contest. Who are they? The Arabs. Why? Who are the Arabs really? And wherein lies their power? And you will understand now what is happening. Why all of a sudden it's Muslims against Americans and so on. What really is going on? Who are the Arabs? Avram Avinu. God says you're going to have children and so on, all this kind of stuff and so on. And not only that, but Yishmael tried to kill Yitzchak. And that's why Sarah came over to Avram and he said, they will not inherit with my son Yitzchak. Get him out of here. So Avram is very distraught. So Avram offers an incredible prayer. He says, Lu yichye Yishmael lifonecha. Oh, it should be that Yishmael, my son, should live before you. What is that? And the Zohar says that when that came out of Avram's mouth, the angels cried because this was a terrible blow to Israel. Why did Avram say it? Perhaps Avram didn't know what happened. Le'asad love means in the future. What was the meaning of what he said? And God said, V'gam Yishmael shmaticha, and I've also heard your prayer of Yishmael. What Avram said is the following. He says, all nations exist because of the sins of the Jews. Remember, the flow of holiness goes to the Satan, and he gives it to the nations, and that's how they exist. Without the sins of the Jews, they could never achieve kingship or status of a superpower. But Avram says that Yishmael yichye lifonecha, they should become a world power not because of the sins of the Jews. They have their own direct link to God. What a statement. That means it is irrelevant that the Jews sin or not. Lu yichye Yishmael lifonecha means let them live before you, and they're not dependent on the religion of the Jews, whether they sin or not. They have what's called their own shefa. And that shefa makes them a world power irrespective of the Jew. That is one of the reasons why the Christians are always getting the Jews to convert. Because they need to convert the Jews to become Christians. That is the sinning of the Jews. And once the Jews sin, then they can take their energy. That's why Christians always want the Jews to convert. Muslims don't care. They just want to kill the Jews. They want to rival the Jews. They're not interested in having Jews. Maybe in the beginning they were, just to give legitimacy to the religion. But Muslims don't care that Jews convert. On the contrary, Jews are a dhimmi status, which means a slave status to all Muslims. The infidels, anybody who does not believe Muhammad as the last prophet, is a dhimmi, is an infidel, is a low class. Therefore, Yishmael is not interested in what the Jew does. Not only that, but Yishmael does certain very interesting things. Imagine, you want to open a shoe company. So what do? You open a shoe company and you want to put the other shoe company out of business. So what do? You make a great shoe. But somehow you just can't put the guy out of business because the other guy's got a great shoe too. So you don't know what to do because he's costing you a lot of business. So what do? You go over to a business consultant and you say, listen, I want to put that guy out of business. I want to be the only man in the only shoe store in town. What do? So the guy says, well, what are you trying to do? So he says, well, I'm trying to make a great shoe. So the guy says, you're making a big mistake. That's not the way to do it. Don't even bother with your shoe company. Get a job in the other company and then rise to the top and kick out the whole board of directors. Don't be a rival. Take them over. That's the difference. That's the strategy of Yishmael. Christianity is a rival. Yishmael is a takeover. What's the difference? Take a look at Yishmael and you understand why they're so holy. In fact, if you don't think so, listen to this. The Medrash says that on only two nations will I attach my name. Yisroel and Yishmael. Why? Why is God's name part of the nation of Arabs, Yishmael? Because they have a direct link to God. It doesn't go through anything else. Therefore, it is not the sins of the Jews that give them the power. It is their own greatness. And that's what the Roshim said, V'gam legoy godel asimenu, I will make him a great power. Which means, wait a minute, what do you mean you make him a great power? Depends if the Jews sin. And the answer is it doesn't make a difference. They will become a great power irrespective of the level of religiosity of the Jewish people. And Yishmael is interested in a takeover. How do you see this? Take a look. We do circumcision, milah, and that is a sign of the covenant. Yishmael does it also. They do milah because they say that they are the children of the covenant. Right? Not only that, did you ever see the way the Arabs women dress? Sneers. Not only that, Arabs are monotheistic. Like we, they are truly monotheistic. There's no paganism in Islam. Not only that, we pray how many times a day? 3. What do? 5. They pray 5 times a day. And not only that, what are Arabs doing now? And they're doing this for this specific reason. Arabs are committing suicide. Why? Because that is a demonstration that they are greater than the Jews, or so they think. What is the major feature of a Jew? In fact, it's what brought the Akedah. Because Yishmael went over to Yitzchak, the Medrash says, and said to him, I was Moshe Nefesh. I was circumcised when I was 13. So Yitzchak said to him, so what? If God asked me to give up my life, I would do it. Immediately, v'achar hadvorim mo'ele, and it was after these words, which is the Akedah, and that's the juxtaposition of after these words with what the conversation was between Yishmael and Yitzchak. So Yitzchak is saying, I would give my life to God. So Yishmael is trying to prove, no, we would give our life to God also. Suicide bombers. That's what they're doing. They are trying to display Mesiras Nefesh. And it is Mesiras Nefesh. That's what they're doing because it's another rival argument. Christians don't Mesiras Nefesh. Christians don't kill themselves. Jews do. And so do Arabs. Because that's the holiness of an Arab. But you know what the problem is? Where is the falsity of all this? Because when a Jew is Mesiras Nefesh and he gives his life up in martyrdom, he takes his own life. When they take their own life, they take another 50 people with them. What kind of business is this? You kill innocent people, you call that Mesiras Nefesh? And not only that, when they do this, they're waiting for all the women in heaven. This is Mesiras Nefesh? What kind of Mesiras Nefesh is this? Of course it's a facade and a charade, but they're trying it. Now, of course the Arabs don't think this way. Why are they doing it? Because every nation has a malach, and the malach knows what to do to support his nation in judgment. So he puts into the consciousness of the Arabs, give your life for Allah. Because that's what I need to argue in the court of law upstairs. And that's exactly what they're doing. So what's happening is incredible. Is really the Yishmael are trying to take over Company A, our company. And in the end, that's really what's happening. Lest you think that what is guiding the Yishmael isn't the Satan? No. Because Yishmael is the last exile. He's the 5th exile. That's really what he is. But he's an extension of Esav. But he, in the end, the Jews must be under the exile of Yishmael, because like I said, he's the last one that the Satan can use. Therefore, the last exile are the Arabs. You notice Christians don't really persecute Jews anymore openly. They do it in a sophisticated way under the guise of peace. And they make believe that it's a peace process. Of course it's not. But Arabs kill Jews openly because they have taken over the agency of Esav. That's really what's happening. We are witnessing the shift from the agency of Esav to the agency of Yishmael. And that's what's happening. Lest you think that Yishmael is not under the direction of the Satan. How do you spell Islam? Aleph, Samach, Lamed Mem, Islam. That's the exact same letters as the angel Satan, Samuel. Same letters. That's his letters. They are under the Satan as much as any part of Esau. Except they're the last, because he's got nobody left. So he took a nation that is holy, much holier than Esau. Yishmael is much holier than Esau. And that's who he's got. That's why we have such sorrows, because they believe in one God. They're rivaling us. They're in company A. That's why the angels cried when Avraham Avinu said, he should live before you, which means that he is independent of the level of religiosity of the Jew. But that's bad news. It means that even if we're tzaddikim, we can't bring him down. So then how do you bring this guy down? And the answer is, when he uses up his merits, that's how he comes down. So every time he kills Jews, he uses up his merits. Therefore, when it comes a time that he has used his schusim, the schus of milah, circumcision, or the schus of tefillah, or whatever, when that ends, he's out. And all of a sudden, if you think, when you looked at the fall of the World Trade Center, the spectacular fall of those buildings, and I'm sure everybody saw it, and they just stared in disbelief, that you probably had to pinch yourself to convince yourself that what you were seeing is true. This is nothing compared to the spectacular event that God has in store when he will kick the Arabs out of Israel. But we don't know how that will really be, although it's possible to conjecture. But only he knows how to do it. Unless you say to me, what are you talking about? It's incredible. You think God can't kick all the Arabs out of Israel? And he swore to Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov that this is our land? I'll tell you something. If you would have walked over to Brezhnev and told them, do you know that in less than 30 years, communism will no longer exist? And neither will the Soviet Union. What would Brezhnev have said? Actually, he wouldn't have said anything. He would have killed you. But who would believe this? It's impossible. Yet Soviet Union and communism fell without one bullet being fired. The most evil power, which we know is what? Is the first aspect of Esau, fell. Who would have believed it? Because God laughs at this thing. What do you think, I got a problem with this? Of course I can take him out without any bullets. He can do the same to Yishmael. And he will do it. The question is, how long are their merits going to protect them? But they are difficult people to remove. That's why Arafat never dies. Never. Do you know how many times Arafat has fallen out of planes? It's incredible. Because God needs Arafat. Why? Because Arafat represents Yishmael. And that's who we want. It's like Hitler. Same muzzle. Arafat doesn't die. He doesn't die because he's the guy that has to represent Yishmael. Period. And therefore he will not die until the time comes that Yishmael is gone, and then he and all the Arabs are out of Israel. This then is what we begin seeing, the shift, that America is no longer the persecutory agent. They are losing that. It doesn't mean America will go down. That doesn't mean that. It means that the ones assigned to bring Israel into an incredible status, persecutions and so on, is moving from Esau or Edom, America, to Yishmael, the Arab people. This is fundamentally what is happening. Tell you something interesting. Why did the Intifada happen in a Shemitah year? Last year was Shemitah. Why? Is that by accident? No. Nothing is an accident. Because the Gemara says that the reason why the Jews were evicted from Israel is because they did not observe Shemitah. Therefore the Sultan says, hey, they're out. I want my guys to come in, Yishmael. And the only ones who can take over Israel is Yishmael, because there's no Avodah Zarah, monotheism. God will not allow Christianity over Israel except for a very brief time. The Crusades could never dislodge the Muslims, because God will only allow Islam, which worships one God, to be in that besides the Broch of Avram. In any case, that's the idea in terms of why Yishmael is on top of the Beis HaMikdash. So the Malach of Yishmael says, hey, these guys are out. They don't observe Shemitah. He's being mekatreg. He's prosecuting. So therefore, I want my guys in. I want Yishmael. Right? Now all of a sudden, when the Sultan is pulling in these guys, right? The Sultan is saying, hey, I need my Yishmael. They are holier than the Jews. Because that's his argument. So God says, what do you mean they're holier than the Jews? So the Sultan says, they don't observe Shemitah. So God says, what are you talking about? 20% of all the farmers in Israel observe Shemitah this year. Do you know that there was a 50% increase? And even though all the Jews didn't observe Shemitah, but God says, listen, they're growing, they're getting better, they're doing tshuva. This year, Shemitah was much better than last, and so will the next. So the Sultan has no argument. So God makes the intifada happen in the very year that the Jews have a merit of Shemitah. This is what's happening. Why it happens in Shemitah. And of course, the concept the Gemara says is that the Motzoi Shemitah, the year after Shemitah, is the beginning of redemption, Moshiach, when David comes. Now, we've got one more medrash, and you can all go home. But this is an utterly fascinating medrash, and this says it all. So if you waited so long, wait for this. There's a medrash in Pirkei Rabbi Eliezer, an astounding medrash that says the following. It's in the 30th parak of Pirkei Rabbi Eliezer, and I want to remind you that Pirkei Rabbi Eliezer was written 2,000 years ago. That's a long time ago. Here goes. Omer Rabbi Yishmael. Rabbi Yishmael says the following. Bi'achos hayomim, in the end of days. Now, it says in the Medrash, Yishmael, Bnei Yishmael, the Arabs will make 3 wars. 3 incredible aggressive acts of violence against the world. One is Ya'ashibi Arav, is in the forests of Arabia. What does that mean, the forests of Arabia? That means that the Arabs are going to make war against the Arabs, because it's in the forest of Arabia. But wait a minute, Arabia has no forests. Persian Gulf War. Did you ever look at the 500 oil rigs standing out of the ground? Just like a forest. Incredible. So therefore, the interpretation of that first is the Persian Gulf War, which is the beginning of the violence of Yishmael. Second is that they will commit acts of violence on the sea. Biyam. Now, that it's not clear, but I can interpret it as the USS Cole, which is a tremendous act of aggression. But the third prediction is incredible. The third prediction says this, that Yishmael will make war, commit a tremendous act of aggression. Where? Kineged Krach Godel Shibaroimi, against the great city of Rome. What is the great city of Rome? Who is Rome? America. Rome is now the superpower. They are the chief people that represent Esav. Who is the great city of Rome? New York. It actually says that the last deed will be the war or the act of aggression, violence of Bnei Yishmael against the great city of Rome. New York, the World Trade Centers. And then it says in the Medrash, Umisham Yitzmach ben David. Mashiach ben David will sprout. What does that mean? Doesn't mean he will come. It means that the messianic process begins. Smicha, it sprouts. And fundamentally, without going into it, it means that's the beginning of the Tekufa, the era of the Mashiach ben Yosef, because he precedes the Mashiach ben David. That's the smicha. In fact, when we say in Shemona Esrei, Es Semach David, we refer many times to the Mashiach ben Yosef, who is the tzemach, the outgrowth of David, because Yosef is assigned to destroy evil, Mashiach ben Yosef, and Mashiach ben David ushers in the Messianic age. Without going into that. And then it says that this person, Yitzmach ben David, he's going to watch as they fight each other, and then it says, Umisham, and from there, where? From the great city of Rome, clearly where he's watching, Yovel Eretz Yisrael. He will come to Eretz Yisrael. That's what it says. It would seem that the Mashiach is born in New York. And from there he goes to Israel. From this medrash you see it. And it conforms to really what the Moshiach is. Because the Moshiach must be born in the place that he overthrows. Moshe Rabbeinu, where was he born? In the Paro's palace. Why? Because he has to overthrow Pharaoh, Paro and Egypt. Anyway, that's another shir. In any case, but what the real kicker of this medrash is the verse that they bring to support this. What's the verse? It says, how do we know? How do we know that they're going to make this krach kodesh b'roimi, that they will commit a tremendous act of violence and aggression against the great city of Rome, which clearly seems to be New York? How do we know? So the Medrash quotes this pasuk that I quoted before. Mi zeh bo me'edom. Who is he who comes from Edom stained in blood? That's the proof. What is the Medrash saying? The Medrash is saying the following. We know, according to the Haftarah, that there has to be a tremendous act of vengeance of Edom, right? Before the Moshiach comes, because God says, for the year of redemption has come. But we don't know what is the identity of this act of blood-stained clothing against Edom. We don't know what that is. What event is the Haftarah referring to? So when the Medrash says that the attack against the great city of Rome is that, the Medrash is saying is that act of the vengeance against Edom, and therefore God has blood-stained clothing, is identical to the attack against the great city of Rome. That's why the Medrash says, and right afterwards, Ben David Yitzmach, because it says in the pasuk, and the year of redemption has come before me. So the Medrash says that act of vengeance against Rome is the act of the Arabs attacking Edom in the great city. And right after that, the Moshiach comes. This is an incredible Medrash. The Medrash is literally spelling out that before this happens, there will be a tremendous act of retribution against Edom. And that begins the messianic process, not the Moshiach. But why? Why are the Arabs doing this? And you know the answer. The answer is because they are being chosen by the Sultan to be the persecutory agent. And the rule is that when you're the persecutory agent, you try to knock off the one before, because you want to be the firstborn, the Bechor. In Egypt was the Bechor, the firstborn of the Sultan. When the Jews took out all the holiness and Egypt collapsed, then the Jews became the firstborn. When the Arabs are selected, they want to be the firstborn. Therefore, they will attack the previous firstborn, which is Esau. That is why there's an incredible conflict going on. It's not a conflict here. It is a conflict up there. The Malachim are fighting it out. Who is going to be the persecutory agent? Because that person or that agent becomes a world power. That's why. So what is reflected on high is reflected here. Therefore the battle, really, don't make a mistake. America has it all wrong. And I'm sure they know this, but I can't believe that they say this. The enemy of America is not terrorism. It is Muslim fundamentalism against Christianity. The old war that's been going on for 1,000 years, where the Muslims look at the Christians as infidels. That's where it is. And you think bin Laden is the only guy? Of course not. Behind him there's 10 more guys, Muslim fundamentalists, that are happening. This is what's happening. The shift from Esau to Yishmael. But Yishmael for the Jews is much worse than Esau, because we can't even affect them really. You may ask me, so then what does a Jew do today? What do we do as Jews to try to mitigate or minimize the effect of the transference of power? What do we do? I will tell you. What the Jews have to do is exercise chizuk in the mitzvahs that Muslims do, to take away their schus. What does that mean? One, did you ever see a Muslim pray? Not a word. Don't talk in shul. Daven, really. Two, sneers. Be careful. They have sneers, and that's their merit. We have to also